Considering the recent release of the Switch 2 version of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I thought it prudent to release a video talking about my thoughts on the game, my history with it, and why I'm not too keen on playing through the game again. It's kind of interesting kind of seeing this game's legacy because I think for a lot of people, this is seen as like the best Nintendo Switch exclusive RPG, that this is a really unique, fresh take on the RPG. Like, this is like such a good original game for the console. And after having finished it, relatively recently, actually, after having played the sequel, going back and playing X, going back and playing the original, I do have to say that two is not that good. I love three. It's one of my favorite RPGs of all time now. X is kind of okay. I wish it had a better story, but it has some things about it that are really interesting and unique. And of course, like, one is like one of the worst games ever made, but two is like pretty solidly like mid to me, where there are things I like about it. The music, some of the settings, some of the character designs. The character designs in general, I think, are a highlight because of just how many character artists they brought on board to give their own unique styles and this really crazy mishmash of like iconic Japanese artists. Like, the game certainly has a lot of things that like appeal to a lot of different people, right? It definitely does feel like it was a pretty successful game, but at the same time, when I compare it to like other games that I like more, when I compare it to Mario and Luigi Brothership, when I compare it to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, when I compare it to Fire Emblem Three Houses, this is something that like I genuinely don't enjoy that much. It's something that doesn't amuse me. I don't enjoy the gameplay. I don't enjoy navigating the world. I don't enjoy like the plot or story developments. I don't find any of the characters particularly interesting. I'm not interested in the whole like wish fulfillment aspect of like having like, I don't know, some older GF like uh with a split personality. Like, none of that really appeals to me personally. In fact, now that I've gotten into the Tales of games, I can safely say Tales of Berseria, which came out the same year as this, is a far better game with a more interesting cast and a better story. Every Tales game I've played feels as if it's better than this. Like, I just feel as if Xenoblade Chronicles 2 doesn't quite make the landing of being like a really genuinely good, like, anime style game. It's interesting that this game is praised as being so unique and different from other RPGs, because where I'm standing, this is the one that comes off as the most similar to other games. Because I think 1, X, and 3 all feel very, very distinct from the rest of the industry in a lot of ways. 3 is kind of edgy by JRPG standards. You have 1, which has the unique setting and of course established the format, and then you have X, which is like a Western style open world game that's quite a bit bigger and has more content than Skyrim. You look at these games and you see how wildly different they are from the rest of the industry and each other, and then you look at 2, which just comes off like a generic Namco Bandai RPG in a lot of ways. Now, it's produced quite a bit better, I would argue, because the cast is great, the animation is great, the fight choreography in it is fantastic. Honestly, some of the best I've ever seen. Like, there's a lot of things about this game that are exceedingly high quality, but at the same time, it doesn't come together and make a particularly engaging experience. Like, I don't care about Elysium. I don't care about Pyra. I don't care about Mithra. I kind of hate even the concept of Mithra, honestly. I've always kind of felt that way. That like Mithra just kind of exists and undermines like the Pyra character as a concept. Like, you just don't know anything about the world when they throw all these crazy twists at you. Like, another alternative take on it is Nia being like who she is, like Nia's background. Like, none of that makes any sense because you kind of have to just take it or leave it when it comes to this game and its world building. And in my experience, it doesn't particularly do a very good job of that. You're supposed to just like just accept it. And I don't know why you're supposed to do that. Like, the game doesn't really do a whole lot with the concept of blades. It doesn't like make collecting them interesting or fun or something that you want to accomplish. Like, it just feels in a lot of sense that this is a game that reeks of missed potential. I actually said this when it came out, but I feel like considering the blade system and how the game works in like the cutscenes, how blades like team up with people in the cutscenes. Like, I don't understand why this was an MMO style RPG. Like, I look at the gameplay style and I'm just like, I look at like the concept and it makes way more sense for this to be an ARPG like Astral Chain. That was actually my thing about Astral Chain, and that I'm playing it, and it has a similar concept where you have like the two characters on a field like fighting each other, and I'm just kind of like, if Astral Chain had like Xenoblade Chronicles as aesthetics and setting, but like kept the gameplay, like it would have been like a way more successful, interesting game. I feel like it feels like the template is there for something interesting, but like the gameplay style and the general structure don't really lead a lot to it. And like, one of the weird things about the game is because of how like you collect multiple different blades, like what ends up happening is that like in a lot of cases you're not going to be using the blades that you're going to be seeing through the story, the protagonist blades. And that just leads to this weird dissonance because, I think most people would prefer to just see the characters that they're going to be using in the gameplay. Like, it doesn't make any sense to have like this system of like the gotcha thing. Like, the only reason this mechanic is so popular is because gotcha was blowing up at the time and people really liked the idea of pulling sexy girls. Like, that's it. That's the only reason this mechanic has any kind of appeal at all, is because of Coomers who just like really like the idea of having like these women completely dedicated to them. Now, I'm not going to call them incels or misogynists or anything like that, because I actually really do like the character designs in this. It's one of its most appealing features to me personally. But it's really interesting when you look at something like Tales of Berseria, which I would argue has a sexier protagonist, and like how much more they're able to get across into that game by focusing on one character than like going overboard with the anime cliches and the harem shit that they did. That kind of defines Xenoblade Chronicles 2. When you look at Velvet Crow, what you get is a character that gradually grows and develops over time, that has a really interesting setup, payoff, and resolution. And then you look at like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, where it's just kind of like, take me to Elysium, Rex. And then like, you do that, and that's kind of it. Like, it doesn't really leave much of an impression on you. I think it says a lot about Xenoblade Chronicles 2 when most people mostly remember like the comedy bits and like the comic relief characters, and in actuality the game just isn't that funny. And I know it's a meme to talk about this, but Xenoblade Chronicles 2, in spite of its best efforts, is not that funny, especially in the dub. The comic relief bits in Tales of Berseria like feel like they mean a lot more to the characters. They feel a lot more natural. They don't feel as forced into the story, and it never feels as if like the characters are getting sidetracked by what they should be doing. Right? It always feels like it has a purpose. In Xenoblade Chronicles 2, like I would say most of the game is comic relief. Like, there are like, tragic moments sprinkled throughout, but a lot of them are so sudden and concern characters that like nobody really cares about, that they really don't leave much of an impression on you at all. Like, they're just kind of there to justify things happening in the plot. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 tried to be a bit more experimental by trying to be a bit more goofy, a bit more like, weebish, a bit more leaning into fan servicey elements. And I think in most respects, it's worse off for it. Now, that's not to say that the characters aren't more likable and I don't like their designs more, but the simple fact of the matter is, like, if it doesn't come together and form a cohesive video game, it doesn't matter if I enjoy individual elements more than I did with the original. Like the original does feel as if it has a cohesive plot where you're climbing the Bionis and then you go to the Mechanis and then you beat the game. Like it actually feels like you actually have a goal in that game and you come across like side quests and you learn more about the world in like an engaging way. In like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it's so sporadic and all over the place, and they just throw like weird aspects at you out of nowhere. For example, this is a really good example. They introduced the concept of blades to you in Gourmand, right? Like you have Pyra already. You go there and like for some reason, the other characters have to explain to Rex that, like, yeah, the Empire goes around and, like, tries to find drivers for their blades, okay? Stuff that Rex should already know. But what's equally weird is that, like, what happens after that, where they meet Tora and discover that he's making his Lolicon Robo-Maid. And it is such, like, a sudden shift from what we were told before about how like blades work and how they function and like how only certain people can use blades. And here we have some guy who just made his own like artificial weeb blade in the basement. Like it's just like it doesn't really work. It feels way too sudden and it just feels way too forced. It doesn't make you like Tora. It just makes you wonder like why they went to such lengths to establish like how the setting is supposed to work if they're not going to follow its own rules. It's so frustrating because the game feels like it could do something interesting with the setting and characters. Like early on, there's this, they try setting up this idea that like, oh yeah, Titans are dying and we're running out of living space to live on, and that's like set up as the initial conflict. But like in actuality, you don't really get any of that. You get like this sense that like it's all just like world building that doesn't really go anywhere because the Titans dying has nothing to do with the rest of the plot. It has nothing to do with Rex's motivation. It has nothing to do with like getting Pyra to Elysium. It's just this really weird setup to artificially create this idea that the world is more complex than it really is. It's kind of shocking how, in comparison, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 feels way more fleshed out, where the characters have their own unique slang, they have their own culture, they react, quite strongly to like the city that exists at the midpoint of the game and like form an alliance with them. Like all of that makes sense. All of it's cohesive. All of it's built up. All of it's established, right? Of course, people who are like clones who endlessly make war with one another are going to like freak out over the revelation that like humans are actually supposed to reproduce sexually, right? Like it's a really interesting revelation that really ties into like the game's overall themes. And I feel like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 doesn't have anything that manages to leave as much of an impression. Like everything about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is better, from its writing to its characters to its world building to like the quest system, when it comes to like side quest, when it comes to like the concept of hero quests, right? Like, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is capable of having side quests that are more emotionally poignant and incredible than anything in the base game of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, in like the actual main quest line. Like, it is shocking just what you see in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 sometimes. However, it's kind of insane when you look back at when Xenoblade Chronicles 3 first came out, and the overwhelming narrative among the community was that it wasn't as good as 2, that it was censored, it was a massive step down, it wasn't as popular, it didn't sell well, and it's only just now, recently, that we're starting to see, like, opinions on Xenoblade Chronicles 3 turn around. I think because people like me have finished the game years after release and have realized it's actually low-key the best Xenoblade game. Again, it feels as if Xenoblade Chronicles 2 appeals to people's base desires and base needs, while like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is like way more complex and way more engaging. Like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is like shallow kiddie pool bullshit, and then like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is like the high dive, at the Olympics, right? Like the difference in quality between these two games is insane. But what's equally insane is just how so many people desperately tried to pretend that Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was better. And now that we've gotten a re-release of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, now that like people are playing it again, now that it's like, selling very well in the eShop, like the fact of the matter is clear is that this game isn't going anywhere. It still has a pretty strong fan base. It's still doing well like almost 10 years after release. It's still a very popular game. And I think that indicates like that the future of Xenoblade is actually very, very bright. Even though the community tried to rally to destroy Xenoblade Chronicles 3, what we've seen is that Nintendo has pretty successfully built their own equivalent of Tales. Now, I don't like Xenoblade as much as Tales, but I'll still play both and I'll still enjoy both. So, in other words, Xenoblade's established itself as a major, major, major Nintendo RPG franchise. And we're still in that phase where a lot of people haven't realized that. Like, I really feel like at this point, Xenoblade Genesis is going to be kind of a Splatoon Raiders situation or a Pokopia or like a Fire Emblem Three Houses, where like a lot of people wrote this game off initially, thought it was going to fail, thought it wasn't going to be relevant, and then it blows up and in a lot of ways becomes the most popular entry in the series. Like, Genesis seems to be gearing up to be a huge, huge, huge hit. And I feel like we're still in that early phase where, like, the community at large just doesn't want to admit it, because that would mean that all their damage control about Xenoblade Chronicles 3, about how they simultaneously try to downplay and overhype Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the way they treated Xenoblade Chronicles X, and the way they tried to denounce Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, Switch 2, the Switch 2 version earlier this year. Like, all of that has just completely collapsed. Like, this is a major Nintendo IP now. And after Xenoblade Chronicles 3, this series should have a bright future. And the audience should see that. But because Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is put on such a pedestal, we are going through the motions where everybody is acting as if every new Xenoblade game is censored, it's woke, it's toned down, it's not as good. And the simple reality is that's not really true. Like, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has way better waifus than anything in 2. Like, Nail in X Definitive Edition is better than any waifu in 2. Like, the idea that people are trying to cry censorship, like they tried to do with the new costumes for Pyra and Mithra in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which, by the way, are completely optional. Like, what we're seeing is just this insane delusional cope that's not going to end until Xenoblade Chronicles establishes itself as the best-selling RPG on the planet. Like how Pokemon had to do, like how Fire Emblem had to do in like the SRPG sphere. Like, Xenoblade's going to have to do that in like mainline JRPG like games if it's ever going to be taken seriously. And I really don't understand why it has to do that. Because when you look at like the radical direction these games have taken, when you see how much creativity goes into each of them, when you see how much like they all like have completely unique mechanics and stories and characters, when you see just like how they're even able to experiment with like different tones and like universes and all that, like when you see like everything these games do, like I don't understand how you couldn't at least consider Xenoblade to be a viable competitor in the space. But instead, what happened with these games is that everybody wrote them off and said that, like, they were never going to compete with Western RPGs. They would never compete with Final Fantasy. They were never going to be relevant. Even if these people were, like, huge fans of Xenogears or Xenosaga, a lot of them were saying this. Like, until just recently, a lot of people were trying to say that Nintendo ruined Xenoblade, even though that, like, Nintendo is the only reason these games exist and why we've gotten so many of them. In fact, with Xenoblade Genesis coming out next year, like, we've gotten more games under Nintendo than we ever did Namco or Square. Square didn't even finish Xenogears, if you remember. So my thoughts on this are that, like, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is not a game I like. It's not a game I care about. I don't see it as a game I'll ever finish again. I might casually play through it over the next, like, several decades or whatever. Like, maybe I'll finish it again just to see the ending. And, like, as I become more and more of a Xenoblade fan, Like, I'm not too attached to this game. I don't like it. I don't think it's good. I don't care about it. But at the same time, the game is still popular. People still enjoy it. Like, other people can enjoy something that I don't really care for. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's the mindset that we really do have to be in as Nintendo fans, because I see too many people doing this thing where they're just like, well, if I'm not interested in something, it's worthless. That's very clearly not true, because Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is not a game I care about at all. And yet its direct sequel, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, is one of my favorite games on Nintendo Switch. Like, 3, like, absolutely killed it. And that's, like, my personal preference. That's my hot take. Like, I don't know anybody else who considers 3 to be the best one. But, like, that game did things for me that no other RPG ever has. And I feel like, considering the way these games are structured, like, I don't think you can just write them off because you just didn't like one entry, or didn't like one joke in one game, or didn't like Pyra's design or whatever. Like, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is nothing special, but I loved 3, and I'm really, really excited for Genesis because I love 3. Like, these clearly are, like, talented developers that are just, absolutely killing it right now, and yet, like, we're in this mindset where people are just not willing to acknowledge just how interesting and special they are. It's really interesting to look back on that last Nintendo Direct where they confirmed the existence of Xenoblade Genesis. And the immediate reaction from everyone was to get upset and to complain that they're producing another Xenoblade instead of doing something original. But, like, the fact of the matter is, Xenoblade is every entry is basically its own thing. Like, you can't really see these games as, like, direct sequels or knockoffs of each other. Like, other than maybe the combat system, which has grown and evolved throughout the years, like, they don't really have all that much in common. The idea that people had that Genesis was going to fail or that nobody cared about it, I feel like that is going to be a take that ages very, very, very badly. And you can see that in the bestsellers page, right? Right now, you can see Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition and Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Definitive Edition and the upgrade patch for Xenoblade Chronicles 2 all on the bestsellers page. Like, you have like 3 Xenoblade games on the bestsellers page right now. And that's going to keep adding up over time. Like, I don't think these games are going to go away. I think these games are going to keep developing fans indefinitely. I think they've established, like, a dedicated following, and people are really interested in seeing what comes next. Like, they do have a pretty dedicated audience now. And the idea that that this is a niche game made for weebs, like, I feel like that is a mindset that is completely out of touch. And the idea that these games are never going to be popular, that they're never going to take off, that people are inevitably going to go support Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest or the Elder Scrolls or Baldur's Gate over this is completely wrong. Like, we have seen this happen several times over the past 20 years, where a previously underappreciated Nintendo property, blows up and suddenly becomes a huge deal. Like, we've seen this happen with, Tamagotchi, with Animal Crossing, with, Wii Sports. Nintendo Switch Sports was a huge hit in spite of the massive slam campaign against it. And the sequel is probably going to be just as good. Like, we're seeing a lot of people, like, rally to downplay these games. Fire Emblem, I think, is the really good example where, like, after Awakening, it became one of Nintendo's biggest IPs. And I think we are very clearly seeing that beginning to take shape with Xenoblade. I don't know if Genesis is going to be the big explosion, but, like, it's definitely coming. It's definitely on the way. And I feel as if the masses just aren't accepting it. They're not willing to accept that this game is on the up and up and will continue to be popular and successful for a long time. It's really interesting how people wrote this IP off after Xenoblade Chronicles X got released, and how quick the turnaround was. Because in a lot of ways, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I think, is kind of the series' first foray into mainstream JRPG stardom. right? Because this is the game that everyone looks back on fondly and remembers as like a standout, unique title on the Switch. And I don't necessarily agree with that assessment, but at the same time, there is no denying that it is true. In a lot of ways, I think Xenoblade's already had its like first explosion of popularity. Like what it needs now is that next little explosion to push it past Final Fantasy and establish itself as just the best RPG franchise on the planet. And I think it's very, very close to happening. I do think they are very, very close to demonstrating that Nintendo is the home for the best RPGs on the planet. And I would argue that's been true since the Game Boy era, but it's interesting how the industry tried to rally behind Final Fantasy and the Elder Scrolls, only for those things to fall off, only for Nintendo to swoop in with a company that they acquired, developing a new IP with them and like kind of surpassing all of that. This is not something that anyone could have predicted, because I think a lot of people are still stuck in this mindset that like Nintendo can't handle JRPGs, that they can't handle visually demanding games, that they're not powerful enough, that they don't focus on stories, that they don't invest in games that aren't made for children. And that hasn't been true, honestly, ever. Like even in like the 90s, they were like in the middle of producing like Eternal Darkness and all that. Like the simple fact that GoldenEye, you know, like they were killing it in the 90s when it came to like their games targeted towards the older demographics. Like all that happened is that PlayStation came in, paid off all these third-party developers to exclusively support their platform. And that's why the illusion that Nintendo didn't have games for adults like took hold in the industry. But we're in this situation now where it feels as if people can't let go of that image, where people still believe Nintendo RPGs aren't on the same level as most other RPGs, even though they sell more and are higher quality. In other words, the only reason why Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy are bigger than Xenoblade is because they're more well established and because of brand recognition. Like as an actual video game, in this day and age, I think it's very clear that Xenoblade is quite a bit more popular. And I think with another couple of entries, it's going to be more generally accepted that Xenoblade can get higher quality games out faster than Square can. And from there, I think it's only a matter of time until Monolith Soft grows to the point where they can surpass Bethesda and all these Western RPGs that the industry loves to glaze, even though that nobody plays or cares about them. Like what we're seeing now is Nintendo setting the foundation for the biggest RPG franchise on the planet. And the fact that people can't see it, to me, is just downright insane. Like these games are longer, have more content, and have more things to do than pretty much any of its competitors. And the fact that people haven't noticed yet is kind of telling like how out of touch and insane they actually are. It remains to be seen if Genesis is going to be another huge hit for the franchise or if the industry is going to rally to downplay it again. But I do think inevitably what we're going to see is that people are going to realize just how much better these games are than the competition. Like there were better RPGs out when Xenoblade Chronicles 2 first came out, but after 3, I no longer think that's the case. Like name a single RPG in the past decade that's better than Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Like if you try to say Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ring or like Cyberpunk 2077, all that is wrong. Okay, none of that is anywhere near the level of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and it's only a matter of time until the industry at large begins to accept that. I expect these games are going to keep getting bigger and better, and it's going to become harder and harder to downplay and ignore them. Like these games have such passionate fans and are so engaged with the material and will play and replay them endlessly that in a lot of ways I don't really see any of them going away. You know, Xenoblade 1 is almost 20 years old. Like, you know, what's going to happen, when the game is 20 years old and still played as if it's still as relevant as a modern day game? Like we're starting to see that happen with a lot of these games now, where Skyward Sword HD gets re-released and it becomes a huge hit, right? Link's Awakening gets remade, it becomes a big hit. Like it's becoming kind of a trend in this industry to see how everybody is just constantly going back and playing these amazing Nintendo games that are decades old in a lot of cases, while ignoring brand new releases like Grand Theft Auto 6. Like, this is the death of a thousand cuts. We are going to see Nintendo putting out like dozens of games like this across dozens of different genres, all while the industry at large becomes increasingly reliant on Grand Theft Auto 6 to justify the existence of the PlayStation brand. That's kind of where we're at right now. Like, I'll be playing games like Xenoblade Chronicles, Xenoblade Genesis, and Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave in the next year, while GTA players are going to be desperately trying to gaslight themselves into thinking the game was worth the selling price. Like, what we're seeing is a slow, gradual decline of the PlayStation empire. And I am very, very happy to see it. So what do you all think about all this? Please let me know in the comments below. Support my Patreon. Please consider supporting my book, The Dream Warrior, which is up on Amazon right now. You can find the details on my website, and I will see you all next time. Thank you.